Hello and welcome to this video. I will be discussing the statement, the Sabbath existed after Mount Sinai. Now, does the creation story take place before Mount Sinai or after Mount Sinai? If the statement that the seventh-day Sabbath was instituted at Mount Sinai didn't exist beforehand, then Mount Sinai had to exist before the creation of the world. The reason is simple. Within Exodus 20, verse 11, it traces the origin of the Sabbath back to the creation of the world, by God's own example of creating the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and resting, blessing, and hallowing the Sabbath. Now, doesn't Exodus 20:11 sound very similar to Genesis 2:1-3? Both passages talk about the creation of the world. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is. And in Genesis, it has the creation stories mentioned in chapter 1 and chapter 2. And a cute little summary in chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. God rests on the seventh day mentioned in both chapters. So it's the same day, kind of the same idea, but here's something interesting. The seventh day is blessed in Genesis, and the Sabbath day is blessed in Exodus. The Sabbath day is hallowed in Exodus. The seventh day is sanctified or hallowed. Same thing within both passages. Now, from comparing Exodus 20:11 and Genesis 2:1-3, could it be possible that the seventh day and the Sabbath are the same thing, thus affirming that the Sabbath existed at the creation of the world? Question: is the seventh day the Sabbath? Now, some may not believe that the seventh day is the Sabbath, and the following are a bunch of texts that state the seventh day is the Sabbath. The New Testament states this in Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, so here's the ending of the Sabbath, began to dawn to the first day of the week. What day of the week takes place before the first day of the week? The seventh day of the week. Luke 23:54-56 talks about the women who wanted to embalm Jesus on the preparation. It began to dawn toward the Sabbath, so they left off, and they later returned on the first day of the week. In Mark 16, verse 1, when the Sabbath was over, so they came early in the morning the first day of the week, in Mark 16, verse 2. So, the question is this. The seventh day being called the Sabbath day, is it possible that they are both the same thing? Is it possible that the seventh day mentioned in Genesis 2:1-3 is the Sabbath day, and therefore the Sabbath existed before Mount Sinai? Question: is there a very precise, spelled out, clear-cut example of people being commanded to observe the Sabbath before Mount Sinai, basically Exodus 20 when it is spoken? So where are the Israelites in Exodus chapter 16? When are they? Take notice of that. Don't just read over it. Note it. Was the Sabbath mentioned in that time and place in the wilderness of sin? If it is, then it existed before Mount Sinai. Then, alright. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven unto you, and the people shall gather a certain rate every day, that I might prove that they may walk in my way or not. What is God saying? My law, His way? How is He going to test them? Obviously, this is something they could break. They so choose to do so. So on the sixth day they gather twice as much manna. So why are they going to gather twice as much manna on the sixth day? Also notice what happens on the seventh day. Some people try to go out on the seventh day and try to look for manna. They found none. And why is God upset by this? What is it that they did? Well, God says to Moses, "How long refuse you to keep my commandments and my laws?" If the Sabbath wasn't a command before Exodus 16, how could God make a statement like this? Doesn't everything that God say is true and trustworthy? Isn't the Bible a trustworthy book? Well, the question then is, how is the Sabbath mentioned as being broken by those looking for manna on the Sabbath if it didn't exist before Mount Sinai? And you can read through those verses. Just if you didn't catch them, pause them. Like anything else, if it's too fast, pause it. And Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto the Lord. You shall not find it in the field." So it sounds like Mount Sinai was before Exodus 16, or was it? Well, that was in Exodus 19. Is Exodus 16 for Exodus 20? Does Mount Sinai take place in Exodus 15? Or in Exodus 19 and 20 when they finally get to Mount Sinai? Okay, so in the wilderness of sin they get the Sabbath. Spelled out clear cut and very obviously. And why does God state that it will prove them whether they will walk in my law or not? Because there's a law that God has, and wants to know if they will listen and obey Him. So, why is that displeasing God when they're on the seventh day looking for manna? So, the wilderness of sin. Just notice between Exodus chapter 16 through 20 all the things that take place. And read Numbers 33, 12 to 15. Notice the order of when they get to Sinai and the wilderness of sin. So, from Numbers 33, 12 to 15, you understand that the wilderness of sin is before Sinai, and the Sabbath was before Sinai. In Genesis 8:22, is it possible to imply that when God says, "While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease," is it possible to state that the Sabbath would not cease either, since it is part of the cycle of time? So then it would have been implied that it was before Mount Sinai, but this is just implying that. Remember in Exodus chapter 5, verses 4 and 5, when Pharaoh says, "He let the people from their work and make them rest from their labor." How is it that Moses and Aaron could make the people rest? Unless, maybe, it is to observe the Sabbath. And that's how you make them rest, because this is a commandment of Jehovah. Also notice that the word rest there in Exodus 5:5 in the Hebrew is very similar to the word for Sabbath in Hebrew. They're similar. Also, here's an interesting thing I've thought of. In the Spanish version of the Bible, in Exodus chapter 20, when it mentions the Sabbath, it doesn't say Sabbath. Like, it doesn't say Sabado, it says reposo. And reposo means rest. So is that possible that that rest could be the seventh-day Sabbath? If so, then it existed before Mount Sinai. Is it possible that 7-day week cycles mentioned within Genesis and one time in Job could have had their fulfillment and termination because of the Sabbath, that it was the marker? And what about Jesus' own words in Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for man? So, think back to the 7-day cycles. Could it be possible that from Jesus' statement the Sabbath was made for man, that the patriarchs kept the Sabbath as well?